Hello, welcome to Unbelievable Tales.
A blind date, one daughter in a wheelchair, and a millionaire who no longer believed in love, only in loyalty. Mark Berman didn't bring flowers. He didn't dress to impress or prepare small talk. What he brought to every blind date he attended was his daughter. And a silent question: would you still smile if she came first? After a scandalous breakup with a wealthy fiancé who publicly humiliated his disabled daughter, Mark stopped hoping for connection. But he didn't stop searching for something even rarer than love: kindness. The kind that didn't look away, didn't pity, didn't pause. That's why, on a crisp fall afternoon, he arrived early at a small family-owned café on the corner of Maple and King. A place filled with old light fixtures, handwritten menus, and a warmth that reminded him of his late wife. Elizabeth was beside him, 8 years old, sharp-minded, quietly observant. She wore a navy hoodie, leggings with embroidered stars, and sat in her wheelchair silently tracing the edge of her cocoa cup. The plan was always the same. The woman arrives, sees Elizabeth, reacts, and reveals everything before dinner even starts. But what happened that evening wasn't part of any plan. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The cafe bell jingled softly. Cecile Kassler stepped in with the kind of energy that didn't ask for attention, but drew it anyway. Simple coat, loose scarf, soft curls pinned up in a practical clip. She scanned the room, one hand gripping the strap of her bag. Mark watched from across the room, silent. She walked toward them and paused just briefly at the sight of the child beside him. But not to stare, to smile. "Hi," she said warmly, crouching slightly so her eyes met Elizabeth's. "I'm Cecile. I like your boots." Elizabeth blinked, looked down. The boots were purple, a bit scuffed, with little reflective stars near the toes. "Thanks," the girl said softly. Cecile straightened and looked at Mark. "Mark, right?" He nodded. "You weren't expecting a chaperone." "I wasn't expecting a table," she replied with a soft grin. "But I'm glad there's one." They sat down, the three of them, and for the first time in a long string of forced dates, Mark didn't feel like he was bracing for impact. Cecile didn't pretend to be overly nurturing, didn't coo or ask invasive questions. She simply included Elizabeth, offered her a corner of the shared menu, asked if she liked sweet or savory breakfasts, and when the girl chose pancakes, nodded approvingly. "Best choice. Never trust people who order dry toast," she said with mock seriousness. Elizabeth smiled, barely, but it was real. Mark noticed. As they waited for food, conversation drifted gently. Cecile taught literature at a community college. She mentioned it casually, but her eyes lit up when she talked about how her students responded to poetry. "I make them rewrite classic sonnets using slang," she said. "You haven't lived until you've heard Shakespeare through Gen Z sarcasm." Mark chuckled despite himself. He hadn't expected to enjoy this. Then the wind picked up. The door opened. A chilly draft rolled through the cafe and settled on their table. Mark instinctively reached to adjust Elizabeth's scarf, but Cecile was already moving. Without a word, she stood, slipped out of her coat, and wrapped it around Elizabeth's shoulders like it was the most natural thing in the world. No comments. No "are you cold, sweetie?" No performance. Just warmth. Elizabeth looked up at her. Cecile winked. "You're the most important person at this table. Gotta keep the VIP warm." Mark didn't breathe for a full second, because that was it. That was the thing he'd been searching for. Not attraction, not effort, but instinctive kindness. The kind you couldn't fake. They finished the meal slowly, comfortably. Cecile didn't rush, didn't fidget with her phone. She listened, and when it was time to go, she stood, gently squeezed Elizabeth's hand, and looked at Mark. "Thanks for the pancakes," she said. "Both of you." Then she left, unaware she'd left something behind. Her coat. Mark didn't notice until 10 minutes later. By then, she was gone. He picked it up, held it briefly in his hands, and something tugged at him. It wasn't perfume or fabric. It was the weight of it, the shape of it, the gesture it held. Then his fingers brushed something in the pocket, a business card. Simple, clean. See. Castler, literature instructor, Lincoln College. A phone number, an email. He stared at it for a long time, not because he was unsure of what to do, but because, for the first time in a very long time, he wanted to see someone again, not because he needed to know more, but because he already knew enough. Mark didn't call right away. He could have. The number was right there on the card. Ink slightly smudged at the corner, like it had been in her wallet for a while. But something told him to wait, to do it right. So the next day he didn't call. He visited Lincoln College, a compact campus tucked between a library and a row of modest student cafes. A corkboard near the English department door displayed flyers for book clubs, poetry readings, and tutoring sessions. And there, neatly pinned near the middle, was her name. Professor Cecile Castler, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Office 2B. He left the coat at the front desk with a short note tucked into the pocket. For the woman who noticed warmth before anything else. "I owe you coffee, Mark." Then he left. It wasn't a move. It wasn't a test. It was a quiet invitation. 2 days later, his phone rang. "Hi," her voice said. "So, was that your way of asking me out again? Or do you return coats for sport?" Mark smiled into the receiver. "Would you believe I just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost?" A pause. "Meet me somewhere that doesn't have pancakes?" "I know a place," he said. The Bookstore café was tucked behind a row of antique shops, a place where floorboards creaked, books weren't alphabetized, and every table had a flickering candle in a chipped teacup. It smelled like paper, cinnamon, and autumn air. Cecile arrived wearing a different coat, a green one, oversized. Hair down this time, slightly windblown. No makeup, no need. "I almost didn't come," she said honestly as she sat. "Why?" Mark asked, setting down the 2 coffees he'd already ordered, one black, one with cinnamon oat milk. "Because I don't like being misread," she said, taking the cinnamon one without flinching. "And I wasn't sure if last time was something real or just something unusual." Mark looked at her across the table. It was both. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, surrounded by the quiet rustle of readers and the soft clinks of ceramic cups. "I've been on dates," she said finally, "but it's been a long time since I met someone who actually listened when I spoke." Mark nodded. "I've had the opposite problem. People hear me even when I say nothing, but they're never listening to the part that matters." She tilted her head. "And what part matters?" Mark didn't answer right away. Then he said, "The part where you realize my daughter isn't a test. She's the whole point." Cecile stared at him. Then gently, "She's lovely." Mark looked down, hands around his coffee cup. "She reminds me of my sister," Cecile added quietly. That made him look up. "She had muscular dystrophy," Cecile continued. "Not the same thing, but similar shape of struggle, I guess." The kind where people either pity you or ignore you entirely. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it. "She passed away 6 years ago," she said simply. "Some days it still feels like she's around. Others, like I dreamed her." They sat with that for a while. Then Mark said softly, "That's why you noticed Elizabeth." Cecile nodded. Noticed her. Not the chair. Not the hesitation in her hands. Just her. Mark exhaled slowly. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on the table. "You didn't hesitate when my daughter was cold," he said. "You didn't wait to be seen. You just saw her. That's not something I can forget." Their eyes met, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the bookstore blurred into a softer focus, like their table existed in its own hush. Cecile blinked, looked down, smiled faintly. "I almost didn't wear that coat," she said. "It's old, stretched at the sleeves. My sister used to steal it." "She had good taste," Mark murmured. They laughed quietly. The conversation that followed wasn't rushed. It didn't spiral into awkward confessions or forced flirtation. It was simple, honest, about books they loved, foods they hated, what it meant to wake up in the morning and not feel lonely, but still feel alone. And when they walked out of the bookstore into the blue-gray light of early evening, Mark asked, "Can I see you again?" Cecile hesitated. "Even if there's no pancakes?" he added gently. She smiled. "Only if you let me bring the coffee next time." They didn't kiss. They didn't hold hands. But as she turned the corner and disappeared into the streetlight-dusted sidewalk, Mark knew something had shifted. Not in the air. In him. Mark didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety. From stillness. The rare kind that settles into your chest like warm water. The kind that says, "You were safe today." He thought of her smile. Of how she didn't fill silence with noise. Of how she let things land, soft and slow, and never rushed to explain herself. The next morning, he cleared his afternoon. His assistant raised an eyebrow. "Personal matter," he said, and that was all. Their next meeting wasn't planned like a date. Cecile had mentioned once that she volunteered Saturday mornings at a youth center, helping kids with reading disabilities work through poetry, one line at a time. So Mark showed up, not inside, just outside, on the corner bench with coffee in hand. She didn't see him until she came out, hair tied in a messy knot, tote bag full of worksheets slung over one shoulder. "Stalking?" she asked, amused. "Appreciating," he replied, holding out her preferred coffee. "With oat milk." She took it, skeptical. "You remembered?" "I wrote it down." "You wrote it down?" she repeated, genuinely surprised. Mark shrugged. "I forget everything. Except the important things." She stared at him for a beat longer than necessary. "Walk?" she asked. They walked. It wasn't a romantic stroll. It was uneven pavement, Saturday noise, autumn leaves that stuck to the bottom of her boot. But it felt like something real. He asked about her students. She asked about his work, not the business headlines, but what he actually did. "Mostly problem solving," he said, "and meetings that could have been emails." She laughed. "You just described the education system." They talked for blocks. Eventually, they ended up at a small neighborhood park. Empty swings, one broken bench, a mural fading on the side of an old brick wall. She sat. He followed. "It's strange," he said after a moment. "Being here with you feels like breathing after holding it for too long." Cecile didn't speak, just looked at him carefully, like she was weighing something. I wasn't always like this, he said. Controlled. Cautious. She tilted her head. After my wife died, I built a world I could manage. Meetings. Schedules. No room for accidents. No room for grief. That's not management, she said softly. That's survival. Mark nodded slowly. Then, gently, what about you? She hesitated, then said, after my sister passed, I stopped letting people into the quiet parts of my life, the places that still hurt. I smiled. I functioned, but I didn't connect. He looked at her. And now? He asked. I'm not sure, she said, but something about that dinner and Elizabeth reminded me what it used to feel like, to care immediately, without planning it. Mark felt the words settle in his chest like something permanent. He reached toward her, not for her hand, not for her shoulder, but simply to place his palm face up on the bench between them. A quiet invitation. She didn't take it, but she didn't move away. I don't want to scare you off, he said honestly. You're not, she replied. But I need to know something. Anything. Am I just part of something you're trying to fix? No, Mark said, steady. You're the part that doesn't need fixing. They sat there until the shadows stretched long. Then she stood. I have to go, she said. I'll walk you, he offered. No, she said with a small smile. But I'll text you when I get home. And she did. 10 words. No typos. No emojis. Just made it home. Still thinking about the quiet parts. Mark stared at the message and then typed something back. But he deleted it because for once silence said enough. It had been a week of quiet check-ins, shared playlists, one late-night phone call about a student of hers who plagiarized a poem using AI. Mark sent back a meme about CEOs doing the same in boardrooms. They were comfortable, not defined, not declared, but comfortable. So when Mark suggested dinner, just the two of them, no kid, no plans, Cecile didn't hesitate. She chose the spot this time. A cozy Mediterranean place with warm lighting, small tables, and windows that fogged up when it got too loud inside. She arrived early, hair down, olive green dress under a long black coat, book in her purse, lip balm, not lipstick. Mark was 5 minutes late. Unusual. I thought you didn't do surprises, she teased when he sat down. I don't, he said, but I also don't do cinnamon oat milk, and here we are. She laughed, and the tension dissolved instantly. They ate slowly, talked freely. He told her about Elizabeth's love for stargazing, and how she once named a constellation after a nurse who helped her through physical therapy. She calls it Nurse Lisa, even though it's just 3 crooked stars. Cecile smiled. She sounds extraordinary. She is, he said. The conversation drifted. About fears. About the future. About what it meant to start again. Not with fireworks, but with the kind of peace that comes from presence. Then Cecile asked it. Why did you bring your daughter to that first date? Mark blinked. I mean, she added quickly, I loved that she was there, but I was curious. Was it planned? He hesitated, and that pause, that millisecond of doubt, told her everything. Her smile faded just slightly. Mark, she said, careful. Was I part of something? He set his fork down, exhaled. I used to bring Elizabeth with me intentionally, he said, not to sabotage dates, but to see who someone really was, without warning, without preparation. So it was a test. No. Yes. He winced. It started as one. But with you, you didn't expect me to stay, she finished. I didn't expect you to care. Silence. And then, I wish you'd told me. Mark leaned forward. I didn't want to ruin it. I didn't want you to feel like a contestant in some moral obstacle course. But I was, she said quietly. And now, even the things I thought were genuine feel like they might not have been. They were, he said urgently. Every one of them. That moment in the cafe, that wasn't staged. That wasn't part of anything. That was you. She nodded slowly, but the air had changed. I get it, she said. You've been hurt. You've been disappointed. But so have I. Mark's throat tightened. I lost my sister, she continued. And when that happened, people treated me like I was made of glass, like I should be grateful for crumbs of kindness. I promised myself I'd never settle for being tested again. I wasn't trying to. I know, she said, holding up a hand. But intent doesn't erase impact. He sat back. I didn't expect this to happen, he said. Not with you. That's the problem, Mark, she said gently. You were looking for someone to pass a test. But I wasn't looking to prove anything. I was just being me. He didn't reply, and neither did she. The server brought the check. Neither of them touched it for a full minute. Then Cecile stood. I'm not angry, she said, just disappointed and tired. He rose instinctively. Do you want me to walk you? No, she said again. Same word, different meaning. But before she left, she turned back. Elizabeth, she's wonderful, and you're trying. I see that. But next time you meet someone kind, don't make them earn the right to stay. Just let them. And then she was gone. Mark sat back down. The table still held her glass, her napkin, her half-eaten dessert, and her absence. It was loud. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. Mark stood at the window, city lights flickering below like static. Blurred. Meaningless. The kind of night that should have felt calm. Instead, it felt hollow. He didn't pour a drink. Didn't put on music. He just sat in the armchair across from Elizabeth's bedroom door and waited for her to come out, as she always did after a new date. She rolled in slowly, pajama pants trailing slightly at the cuffs, hair tucked behind one ear. Her wheelchair made a soft click against the hardwood. Mark looked up. Couldn't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. He waited. Elizabeth rarely initiated conversation, but when she spoke, she meant it. After a moment, she said, she was the first one who didn't stare. Mark blinked. Cecile? Elizabeth nodded. She didn't ask if I was okay, or if I needed help. She just asked what I wanted to eat. A pause. That was new. Mark swallowed. She made you feel seen? She made me feel normal, Elizabeth corrected. And then, so quietly it barely surfaced, she added, like Mom used to. That broke something in him. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a soft, splitting crack down the middle of everything he'd built to keep the world manageable. Elizabeth looked at him. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, held no judgment, just honesty. She wasn't like the others, she said. She didn't try to impress you. I know, Mark murmured. Do you like her? He nodded. Then tell her something real. He looked at his daughter. What do you mean? Don't say sorry, Elizabeth said. Just show her something you wouldn't show anyone else. Mark sat back, stunned by the clarity in her voice. You think that'll be enough? Elizabeth shrugged. You're the grown-up. He laughed softly, wiped at his eyes before she could see too much. Want to help me plan something? Elizabeth tilted her head. Plan what? He looked toward the door, then back at her, his voice steady. Something that isn't about me. The next morning, he canceled everything. Meetings, interviews, a gala he was meant to host. He called his event coordinator and told her the venue had changed. The guest list too. No sponsors, no donors, just people who matter. She hesitated. What should I tell them the event is for? He paused, then said, to say thank you to someone who gave more than she knew. Cecile wasn't planning on going out that night. She had tea steeping, a book on her lap, grading papers with messy red notes and half-hearted doodles in the margins. The cardigan she wore was too soft to be stylish, but warm enough to feel like armor. So when her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number, she almost ignored it, until she saw the name at the end. There's something I'd like to show you. No expectations. Just a table and some string lights. Same café. 7 p.m. Mark. She stared at it for a long time. Long enough for the tea to go cold. Then she stood. Not to dress up. Not to perform. Just to be there. Just in case. The cafe hadn't changed. Same handwritten menus. Same scratched window near the door. Same warm smell of vanilla and something baking in the back. But tonight it looked different. Someone had strung lights across the ceiling beams, soft amber bulbs glowing like little lanterns. The usual chatter was replaced with something gentler. Live acoustic guitar in the corner, a few hushed voices, and chairs arranged in a way that made the space feel less like a restaurant and more like a gathering. Cecile stepped inside, unsure, and then she saw him. Mark. Simple navy sweater. No tie. Hair slightly tousled, as if he hadn't bothered with mirrors tonight. He stood near a small table at the center, speaking quietly to the cafe owner. When he turned and saw her, he paused, as if to memorize something. Then he walked over. Hi, he said. Thank you for coming. I didn't say I would, she replied softly. I know, he said, but I hoped. She looked around. What is this? I was supposed to host a benefit tonight, at a hotel ballroom. Suits, speeches, corporate banners. He paused. I canceled it. Her brows lifted. Why? Because none of those people mattered in the moment that changed me most. And with that, he stepped aside and motioned toward the center table. It wasn't decorated with fanfare. Just a single coat, her coat, neatly folded across the back of the chair. And beneath it, a handwritten card. She walked to it slowly, picked up the card. For the woman who didn't wait to be asked, she just acted, and reminded us both what it feels like to be seen. The lights dimmed slightly. Someone tapped a microphone. Mark stepped onto the small platform near the window. He didn't hold notes, didn't check his phone. He just looked out at the dozen or so people gathered, friends, cafe staff, and somewhere in the back, Cecile. My daughter taught me that love doesn't begin with a grand gesture, he said. It begins when someone notices what others ignore. He exhaled, continued. I've built a life that many would call complete. But none of that meant anything the day I watched a woman take off her coat and offer it to a shivering child without saying a word. He glanced at Cecile. She didn't know who I was. She didn't care what I owned. She just saw a little girl and acted. He paused. Let the silence speak. We often invest in buildings, brands, and events. But today, I'm investing in something far more rare. A woman who taught me that love isn't loud. It's quiet, kind, and real. There was no applause, just stillness. Cecile stood very still, her hand resting on the back of the chair. Mark stepped down, approached her slowly. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said, voice low. "I'm asking you to believe me." She looked up at him, eyes filled, not with doubt, not with fear, but with something softer. "I don't want a spotlight," she said. "I know. I don't want to be someone's symbol." "You're not," he said. "You're Cecile, and you're already enough." She studied him, then finally a small breath. "I haven't decided if I'm staying yet," she said. "I haven't decided if I deserve it," he replied. They stood in the glow of cafe lights, just far enough from everyone else to feel alone, but close enough to know they were being watched. And it didn't matter anymore. Not the test, not the past. Only this: one table, two people, and a daughter waiting just outside the frame, ready to believe that kindness didn't end with goodbyes. The next evening, Cecile didn't text. She didn't call. She just showed up. No makeup, no coat. The night was warmer. Just a light cardigan, and that same calm presence she carried like a second skin. Mark answered the door in a t-shirt. Not designer, just soft, slightly wrinkled. He looked human. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she replied. Neither moved, neither spoke. Then a small voice from deeper inside the apartment. "Is it her?" Cecile smiled. "I brought cookies," she said. Elizabeth rolled into view, blinking fast, as if afraid Cecile might disappear again. "You didn't leave because of me, did you?" the girl asked softly. "No," Cecile said. "And I didn't come back just because of you either." Elizabeth tilted her head. "I came back," Cecile continued, "because someone in this home understands what real warmth feels like, and I didn't want her to think it was temporary." Mark stood silently beside them, watching the exchange. Like something sacred was happening and he didn't want to breathe too loud. Elizabeth wheeled forward, stopped beside Cecile. Then, in a movement so quiet it was almost shy, she reached for Cecile's hand. "Want to stay for dinner?" she asked. "I do," Cecile said, "but only if I get to help make it." "I burn toast," Elizabeth warned. "I once set oatmeal on fire," Cecile replied. Elizabeth's mouth twitched. A near laugh. Mark exhaled, the first real breath in hours. They moved to the kitchen together. No fancy chef, no wine pairing, just a jar of pasta sauce, mismatched plates, and the sound of water boiling on the stove. And it was perfect. After dinner, Cecile stayed. She helped Elizabeth brush her teeth, then stayed in the hallway while father and daughter shared their bedtime ritual. Two silly facts, one whispered secret, one forehead kiss. Cecile didn't intrude, but when Mark returned, he found her sitting on the couch, legs folded under her, flipping through a paperback she must have pulled from the shelf. "Most women would have run by now," he said. She looked up. "I did," she reminded him, "but I came back." Mark stepped closer. "I'm not good at this," he admitted. "At pacing, at second chances, at not messing it up." "You don't have to be good at it," she said gently. "You just have to be in it." He sat beside her, close but not touching. "I never brought anyone here before," he said. "Not like this." She nodded. "I never stayed anywhere that felt safe enough to unpack my heart." They sat in the hush of low light, soft fabric, quiet clock ticks. And then Cecile leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. Not a grand gesture, just weight, and peace, and choice. "I'm not here to save you," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you make me want to be worth saving." She smiled. "Tomorrow," he said, "we go out, all three of us. Just something small." "What's the occasion?" "No occasion," he said. "Just no hiding." "Okay," she replied. And just like that, their world, once built on testing, proving, and distance, began to reshape itself around something far more real. Not because they said the right things, but because this time, they stayed. A week passed, not with declarations, but with mornings that began with 3 mismatched mugs on the counter, one black coffee, one with oat milk, and one lukewarm cocoa that had to be reheated twice because Elizabeth kept forgetting to drink it. They didn't call it anything. Not dating. Not a relationship. Not a family. It just was. Some days, Cecile left early to teach. Other days, she lingered, grading papers on the balcony while Elizabeth told her stories about constellations that didn't exist. Mark stopped checking his calendar first thing in the morning. He started checking the fridge instead, to see if Cecile had left notes like, "Don't eat the last muffin or I'm leaving you." He never did. On a breezy Sunday, they took a walk through the city's east side, the older part, where cobblestone streets still survived and vines crept up the backs of bookstores. Elizabeth wore a soft knit hat Cecile had loaned her. Cecile pushed the wheelchair not because she had to, but because it was natural now. They stopped at a park. Not fancy, just enough green. Elizabeth fed breadcrumbs to birds while Cecile and Mark sat on a nearby bench. "You've changed," Cecile said suddenly. Mark looked at her. "I've stopped controlling everything." "That's not change," she said. "That's healing." He smiled faintly. A pause. Then, "I want to do something," he said. Dangerous words. No headlines. No cameras. Just a gesture. "Okay," she said cautiously. He reached into the side pocket of Elizabeth's wheelchair, where she had stashed everything from coloring pencils to a half-eaten granola bar, and pulled out a small black velvet pouch. Cecile's eyes widened, but he shook his head with a smile. "Not that," he said. "It's not a ring." She exhaled. "Good. I'd say no out of panic." He opened the pouch and pulled out something folded. Her jacket, the one she'd wrapped around Elizabeth that night, now cleaned and carefully mended where the seam had started to fray. But there was something sewn inside the lining. Cecile took it in her hands. She turned it inside out. "Read the stitched words just above the heart. For the one who didn't ask, and still gave everything." Her throat tightened. Mark said quietly, "You kept her warm, and without knowing it, you did the same for me." She looked at him. "You're impossible," she whispered, "but consistent." She laughed. Then, before thinking twice, leaned over and kissed him. Not cinematic, not perfect, just a slow, certain kiss that said, "I see you, and I'm here." Elizabeth groaned dramatically from a few feet away. "Are you done being romantic?" "I'm cold." They both laughed. Cecile wrapped the jacket around herself, this time warm in every sense of the word, and jogged over to push the wheelchair again. Mark watched them, his daughter, and the woman who gave without needing to be asked. The woman who saw past walls he didn't know he'd built. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man who had something to lose. He felt like a man who had finally come home, not to a place, but to a presence, a scarf, a bench, a quiet hand on his arm. That's what love looked like now. And when Elizabeth turned around and shouted, "Hurry up, you two!" they didn't run. They just smiled and followed, together.
Bye, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.